people that for years and years and years I've consulted to know what to think. So now we can cut out the middle person and you can hear what they think right away. I'm Mike Allen from Politico, and we're honored to be here. We want to thank the people from the Milken Conference who worked so hard to put this on, and thank Mike for the amazing vision that he had for this conference and his idea of shaping the world through these conversations. So we're excited to have Mayor Villaraigosa with us, who also is a lecturer at USC, does a little work for Edelman, and is remained involved in his school's organization, which we'll hear about. Steve Schmidt, Vice President of Public Affairs for Edelman. He was counselor to Vice President Cheney, so it's his fault. He also did strategic communications to make the Chief Justice the Chief Justice, and he helped re-elect, or he was the campaign manager to re-elect Mayor Schwarzenegger, and he was involved in a presidential campaign, governor, thank you, and he was involved in a presidential campaign that still gives him flashbacks. So I won't even mention. Amy Holmes, who is an anchor for The Blaze, lives in that hotbed of conservatism, the West Village, where she...
there are at least three of us.
And I first knew Amy when she was the speechwriter to then the Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist, and she's also worked with the Corporation for Community Service, and so knows New York and DC. Jim Messina, who is the campaign manager who re-elected President Obama. He's been Chief of Staff on the Hill. He's CEO and founder of the Messina Group, and now he heads Secretary, title to come, Clinton's Super PAC. Say the name of her Super PAC.
Priorities
USA. Yeah. So we're going to start with a question that I'm going to get a quick answer from each of you. Mr. Mayor, if you were advising the 2016 Republican nominee, what should the party do to get out of its demographic hole?
Well, I think they need to fix the broken immigration system to begin with. They need to move to the middle on many of the social issues which they're far to the right on.
Those are generational issues. What is something specific that the 2016 candidate can do to improve Republicans' image and standing with minority voters?
I think they need to stop the rhetoric, specifically. I think around immigration, around women, around gays. Their focus on social issues over the years has made them a fringe party in many respects. And this is coming from a guy, by the way, who's at the Bipartisan Policy Center, who thinks it's more broken on the right, but broken on the left too, and I'm willing to talk about that. But I think the problem with the Republican Party is they've just gone so far to the right on social and economic issues, but particularly social issues. And so the advice to them would be, cut it out. Be a party of hope and opportunity. Be a party that talks about bringing people together, talks about America's future in a way that's positive about the changing demographics, and not a party that speaks in a way that I think marginalizes them and demonizes a good majority of America.
All right, Steve Schmidt, the mayor has given us a nice aspirational approach. You're the doctor, you're the clinician. You come in, what specifically can the party do to do better than they did with minorities in 2016? Just to remind you, everybody knows what a hole Republicans are in with Hispanics. An amazing stat, as Jim Messina can tell you to the 8th decimal point, Mitt Romney lost Asians by more than he lost Hispanics.
Right. Just a couple of things, I think, when you look at the structure of the election. If you look at just the states the Democrats have won 6 out of the last 6 elections, they have 242 electoral votes. Doesn't count Florida, Ohio, New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado, North Carolina, Virginia. Very hard to lose a presidential election when you start with a floor of 242 votes. Every demographic group in this country, without exception, that's growing, Democrats are gaining market share. Every demographic group in the country that's shrinking, Republicans are growing market share. That is a death spiral for a political party that wants to win national elections. So the Republican Party can't be a small culturally Southern ideological party. It needs to be a great reform party. And as we look at all the sclerotic institutions in this country that badly need reform, I think that one of the fundamental criticisms of liberalism that I would have is the inability to connect good intentions with results at the end of the day. And so as we look out across the depth and breadth of government, how do these institutions function? How do we make them function with the efficiency of the private sector? How do we reform our institutions to make the country competitive? That's the most competitive country in the world economically. The tax code, our immigration system. We should be a party that represents change and is a great instrument of change and reform. And I think that's where the party should go.
Why are you a Republican?
I'm a Republican because I believe in the Republican values of limited government. We are a federal union of states where the federal government has enumerated powers. It's grown too big, too controlling, and I believe in deeply the values of the Republican Party and conservatism, which I think has turned into something of a cartoon version in last years, dominated by some folks out of our conservative entertainment complex. But I think the conservative movement is a serious political philosophy, and the Republican Party has served this country very well over the course of its history. And in our system of government, we need to have two healthy competing political parties in order for the system to work. And so I have confidence in our future as Republicans, but we have work to do.
Amy Holmes, when you look at the demographic hole that Republicans in, is the party better off or worse off than the day it was the day after Mitt Romney lost? Has the party done anything to help itself?
Well, I see that I get the emails from the RNCs, excuse me, that a lot of young RNC workers are trying to reach out to African Americans. We have Rafi Williams and Orlando Watson that are trying to reach that demographic. But I think obviously it's an uphill battle when you have 90% of the African American voters voting for the Democratic Party. Republicans certainly have a lot of work to do. But I think we tend to overemphasize presidential elections and the national stage. And if you actually look at the state level, you're seeing great successes with the GOP. We have 30 governorships that are controlled by the GOP. 24 states have the GOP in control of the governorships and the legislature. And I think that at the national level that Republicans could do a lot better by looking at solutions that are being crafted at the ground, that are being crafted locally. For example, Bobby Jindal in Louisiana when it comes to education reform. Even Scott Walker in his recall election, he was able to face down labor unions and win re-election in 2012 with a larger percentage than he did in 2010. So I think a lot of the solutions for the GOP, both in reaching younger voters and minority voters, are going to be coming really at the grassroots level. And when you start campaigning for those votes right before an election, it's too late. You need to reach people where they are, bread and butter issues, what really matter to them. When I worked for Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist, a big issue for him was school choice. And I see Nina Reese back in the back there, who worked very, very hard on school choice. And the Senate was able to pass it, and they passed it with the support of African American parents in Washington, D.C., who were leading that charge. If you look at charter schools, for example, in New York City, African American parents are beating down the doors to get their kids into what they perceive as better schools. Again, I think that's where the GOP really needs to focus its efforts.
Jim Messina, what is the correct answer? What could Republicans do to make your life more hellish in 2016?
If I was the Republican nominee for president, I would do 4 things. On the first day, I would tell the Speaker of the House to pass a comprehensive immigration bill. On the second day, I would come out and follow David Cameron's lead and announce my support for gay marriage. On the third day, I would come out and tell my party that they're wrong on climate denying. As long as they're going to continue that, they'll never win a youth vote. And on the fourth day, I would pass a comprehensive pre-K bill to take the issue away from Hillary in the 2016 election.
That's quite a week. Of those,
it's like a French work week.
Of those, which would give them the best chance in 2016?
I don't think I would agree.
Gay
with,
marriage, probably, right?
I don't know. I think that's the easiest of all those things. I think it would be the most surprising to a bunch of youth voters. I would agree with the mayor. I don't think their problems with Latino voters are just about a comprehensive immigration bill. Yep. I think it's much deeper. You know, I saw focus groups recently where they asked Latino voters to describe Republicans, and their two words were racially motivated and fat white guy. And that is a problem for the party brand that you're not going to fix with just one bill.
Now,
Well, and something you mentioned, you know, Asians voted at 74%. African Americans at 96%. Latinos at 72%. There's a reason for that. And you're right, it's not just immigration reform, but I would postulate for the economy, for the Latino vote, fixing the broken immigration system. The Asian vote, by the way, the Asian vote voted as high as they did. Asians know that when people talk about immigration and those people, they know they're including them. That's why they voted in the numbers. We've never seen numbers like that from Asians for the Democratic Party. That rhetoric that comes out of them, when people talk about the South deportation of, at that time, 12, now 11 million people, no country's ever done that. That whole rhetoric on their part, I think, is what is making them lose market share. They fix immigration, they need to do a lot of other things. It could help them and then stop the rhetoric as well.
Steve Schmidt, you're one of the party's most credible and earliest and most vocal voices in favor of gay marriage. I don't know if we can date the tipping point, but we're there. We've passed it. Do people at the national level of the party get that?
Roughly 40% of actual Republican voters out across the country, distinct from Republican policymakers, are supportive of marriage equality out across the states. And I think one of the phenomena you see in the Republican Party is that as you journey from being against something to being for something,
Do you mean like President Obama on gay marriage?
there's always a middle position, which is you just want to stop talking about the issue. And so if you go back 10 years ago when you put marriage amendments on the ballot in a state like Ohio, that advantaged electorally from a turnout perspective Republicans. If these issues wind up on a ballot today, they advantage Democrats. So this isn't a winning issue for Republicans. It's certainly not a winning issue at a national level as this fight has moved into the states. And sooner or later, and I suspect it will be sooner, you will see a Supreme Court decision where essentially legalizes marriage for gay people out across the country. And so I think this is very much an issue that has evolved very quickly, but I think is all but over. And I think elections have to be about the future, not the past. And we don't want to be arguing about something I think that is already basically decided.
Amy,
But
quick,
if I
and
could
we'll move
add
on.
to that, I mean, it's been a tectonic shift in both parties.
Sure.
You had both Hillary Clinton and President Obama who opposed gay marriage, and in President Obama's case, because of his Christian faith, he has now changed that position. But I think what you're seeing at the national level as well, when it comes to the GOP, is that they're letting candidates go their own way on that issue in order to appeal to their specific constituency. If you look at, for example, a GOP primary candidate in Oregon, Dr. Monica Webby, she's pro-choice and pro-gay marriage, and she's getting a lot of attention and national support from Republicans.
But not in a Republican primary for president. I mean, you're right that the states are where you're seeing real change, but you look at who controls the Republican nomination and who those voters are, and you cannot be pro-gay rights today in that primary.
Well, you can be pro-gay rights. I think marriage equality is a different issue.
Joe Becker is out with a book from the New York Times, is out with a book talking about the president's journey on the gay marriage issue. She reports in there that Ken Mellman, the former chairman of the Republican National Committee, worked with Steve Schmidt on the Bush-Cheney re-election campaign, advised the president that this would not hurt him politically to come out and be strongly for gay marriage. After the vice president gave him a little nudge, he did that in the interview with Robin Roberts. Jim Messina, you were there. How much worry was there about the politics of it? At the time, you were very focused on North Carolina. What was the feeling inside?
Well, look, we understood very clearly that that decision was going to do two things. It would motivate some voters, and it would be a problem in some other areas. But the president had, to your point, had an evolution, had spent a bunch of time thinking about this, and was going to be very honest. And I think he started a very important political discussion across the country. And in the end, the way we did it was very little about politics and more about him talking about it.
Did it net help you or hurt you?
Oh, it definitely net helped.
and how?
We had a higher youth turnout in 2012 than we did in 2008. We had a higher
That's an
African
amazing
American.
fact. Take off the exact numbers for the.
Yeah, so we had take Ohio, we had a higher African American turnout by 4 points in 12 than we did 8. In youth vote, we had 2 points nationally higher in 12 than we did 8. After, and I will give you a little grief about this, Politico spent a year saying we had unenthused electorate, and we ended up having a much more enthused electorate. The answer to that was really more about data than anything else, and using data to go find our voters and motivate them. But it was also about believing in a candidate. Democrats could not figure out 2 times how we lost to George Bush. It drove us crazy. Republicans could not figure out how they lost to Barack Obama twice. What are the 2 things, what is the one thing that both those candidates have in common? Really strong bases who cared deeply about them and would do what it took to give them money, to volunteer, and to turn out in unprecedented ways.
Mayor,
You know, Amy said something that I think was very honest. The fact is both parties and both candidates have made political calculuses regarding these issues. I mean, I've been for marriage equality since 1994. In fact, Jim and I actually had a conversation because I was chair of the Democratic Party convention, and everybody knew they were going to ask me, do I think it should be part of the platform? And I said, look, I have to be authentic. I have to be who I am. I've always been for that. And so that's what I said, and you know, they were very supportive of that. But there's no question that both parties, both candidates make political calculuses. That's what's kind of broken, I think, with politics. That's one of the discussion points here. From someone who ran a city that's, a country, 17th largest economy in the world, I think the frustration that mayors have across the country, we're not nearly as ideological as Washington and the state capitals are. We're much more practical and pragmatic. We know how to say no to our interests. I'm a Democrat. Pretty much everybody knows I want another shot at public service. And I've taken on the teachers union. I've taken on the issue of seniority and tenure. One of the things that's broken in both parties is this unwillingness to take on orthodoxy and dogma, our own institutions and our institutional interests. The frustration we have with both parties, and again, I chaired the party, and I'm going to work hard for whoever the nominee is the next time around. But it really is broken over there, and we talked about that this morning. I'd like to talk more about that at some point.
We definitely will. If you want to know a political Houdini act, the mayor mentioned the convention there. The mayor was one of 4 chairmen of the Hillary Clinton for president campaign, and then he was chairman of President Obama's re-election convention. How did you pull that off? Not many people got that kind of absolution.
Jim and I joke. I was in the doghouse for a little while. But look, I have a great deal of respect for the president. I was honored to be chairman of the Democratic Party convention. Even though, as I said, I think for a lot of us, and particularly, mayors, I think, there's a lot of gray there. It's not as black and white for most of us. I think the Republicans would do a lot better if they just weren't so beholden to the interest on the right. And I think Democrats would do a lot better if we weren't so beholden to our interest on the left. Right. And that's what's happening in Washington right now. Neither one of them are able to kind of disassociate themselves from those interests.
And if I could add to that, I mean, you've been asking about the demographic hole that the GOP is in. What about on the other side of the aisle? And we're not talking about the election that's just right in front of us, and that's 2014. Stan Greenberg, a Democratic pollster, is warning the Democratic Party this could be a rout for Democrats, and where they're doing badly among non-college educated voters and among older voters, and those are the voters who are more likely to go to the polls in 2014. And let's face it, if the GOP takes over the Senate, President Obama's agenda is pretty much dead in the water for the next 2 years.
Okay, the mayor brought up Washington, and he talked about how broken it is. Mr. Mayor, what is it something that states, cities, mayors are doing that Washington could do?
Well, climate change. We owned here in LA the dirtiest public utility in the United States of America. We signed on to Kyoto when the federal government didn't. At the time I signed on, it was 150 mayors. Now 1,000 mayors across the country have signed on to Kyoto. LA has dropped its carbon emissions. That great climate you see outside and the air quality, 28%. Number 5 city in the world, number 1 in America. There are a number infrastructure. We're building 4 transportation lines. We're in construction. We built 4. We're in construction in 4 more. It took them, what, 5 years to pass a surface transportation bill?
Okay, well, let's take that example and pull back the camera. What are the mechanics of how Washington could unstick itself?
The mechanics?
Yes.
Explain that, mechanics.
How can, take the issue, the example you gave, climate change. How is it that Washington could start passing stuff in less than 5 years?
Well, I think Steve's right. I mean, they got to, or Jim, they got to acknowledge that that human beings have contributed to the carbon emissions in the world and to climate change. There are things we could do around energy policy, support more renewables. I think we could address this. Tom Friedman recently wrote an op-ed piece where he talked about the grand bargain around fracking, the pipeline, but also investing in renewables, understanding that those are transitional fuels going into the future, focusing on the industry that comes with clean technology. I think there are a number of things that they could do. Historically, infrastructure was never a partisan issue. Democrats used to be for it. Republicans were for it. Virtually everything now has become partisan, and it doesn't have to be.
Okay, Steve Schmidt, you know Sacramento from both having lived there and being a close advisor to Governor Schwarzenegger. Fascinating book that's coming out next month by the editor of The Economist, John Micklethwaite, and Adrian Wooldridge, also of The Economist, called The Fourth Revolution, How to Reinvent the State. And there's a chapter in there that makes a fascinating point about California. It says that there's no better example in the country of a broken government than California's. And it talks about the difference between Palo Alto, which works, and Sacramento that doesn't. They say there's no political distemper that cannot be found in its most extreme form in California. We have a Silicon Valley that works and a California government that's big, broke, and inefficient. Steve, what can the United States government learn from the California example?
Look, I think that one of the things when you look at governance in California, it's the rule of unintended consequences. I think term limits in California has had a pernicious effect on governing the state. Like in most federal congressional races, there are but a handful, if any, competitive elections for the legislature in the state of California. And so what you have at the end of the day is basically, the Republican Party, by the way, if you want to look at a trend line that's deeply worrying, for national implications, and trends that start in California for good and for bad have a way of coming out to the rest of the country. And the Republican Party is in the state of California, is a couple of years away from being the third party in the state. It will be smaller than the decline to state registrants. So basically, what you have in California is a public employee wing of the Democratic Party, and then a more moderate or business-friendly Democratic legislator, chiefly representing in the northern part of the state, through the Central Valley, the agricultural side of the state. And so, you have to have competitive elections if you're going to have a politics that exists in basically the middle of the electorate. And it's also the case in California that when you have a system where TV costs $3 million a week to be on, you have a campaign system in the state where it's impossible for most candidates to actually be able to communicate with their voters for lack of funds. And one of the crises I think that is most acute and directly related to politics and governance in California is really the collapse of media in the state. What goes on at the state capitol goes largely undercovered or uncovered by the California media. They don't have bureaus. This is the city, of course, that invented the car chase by helicopter that breaks into local news, but the governance of the 8th largest economy in the world and its implications for the people who live here is just absent from the day-to-day culture of the state.
And Steve, as someone who governed both in the West Wing and in the governor's office, How does it affect your decision maker or your conversation when there is not intense coverage as we're now seeing in state capital after state capital?
Well, you realize that it's a very disengaged state, and so the things that are, the bane of day-to-day governance, the sharply worded story, or the criticisms, is the recognition, certainly in the state of California, that it's really not being heard by anybody. And what you have is an ability to communicate one or two big things at best.
And Steve, the truth is that those annoying, sharply worded stories promote good behavior in government.
No doubt about it. And look, this California legislature is a cesspool. I mean, it's a mess. I'll tell you, I think it's the most corrupt institution legislatively in the country. Taking another one of these guys out of there, he was arrested, indicted, for gun running in a scheme amongst other things. And I just, it is a state badly in need of reform. And one of the things that Washington Republicans certainly don't understand. I mean, by a mile. I mean, the most conservative politician in this state is Jerry Brown, and Republicans.
So just explain what you mean by that.
Well, Jerry Brown has always been tight with the dollar. He has been, I think, a prudent manager of the state. There's some things I would have done differently, but if there was any state in the country that deserved a tax increase, it's the state of California. And I say that because, at the end of the day, an essential part of conservatism is the notion that you have to pay your bills. And so the state has a long history of spending money without raising the appropriate revenues to fund the programs, creating
Sounds
a
like another
giant
city
black
that I
hole
know.
of debt.
Amy Holmes, how do your friends in New York look at Washington?
Rarely. New York, there's a lot of things to do. Washington's a company town. I also think of it as a college campus, and everybody's talking and thinking and working and sort of revolving around politics, not so much in New York City. But I do want to get to the point about comparing state governance to Washington governance, and it seems to me, to the mayor's point, at the local level, city and state level, there is more of an incentive for pragmatism, whereas if you look at Washington, D.C., between gerrymandering, where the red districts just get redder and the blue districts just get bluer, we saw in 2010 that a lot of those blue dog Democrats were wiped out. They're no longer even serving in Congress. That maybe the hope for bipartisan action might be tilting a little bit more in the Senate, where, as a former chief of staff of mine said, it's really a roving band, and all of these different coalitions are put together and break apart on issue by issue. My former boss passed the prescription drug plan with Democratic support, and we see now, even in the campaigns for re-election in 2014, red state Democrats that are running away from and against Obama's agenda when it comes to gun control or reforming Obamacare. So you're seeing some of these Democrats moving to the center. Perhaps if they're reelected, they'll also govern that way.
Jim Messina, shortly after the president's re-election victory, you and I sat down on a stage like this for a Politico event, Playbook Breakfast, and you told me an amazing fact there. You said that for every key voter in a swing state, you had 600 pieces of data. Just unpack that fact a little bit.
When the re-election started, we had according to Nate Silver, 17% chance to win re-election. And so we decided we had to do three things. Number one, create the electorate we needed, making sure it looked like '08 and not 2010. Number two, we had to use data and technology to build a first of its kind relationship between us and the swing voter. And then three, we had to control the narrative. But on the data side, we believe very deeply.
Be more precise about the 600 figure. What voters were they? I didn't get that quite right.
So in the battleground states, we had between...
And which were how many states?
10. In the 10 states, we had 600 pieces of data on every single voter. We ranked every voter in America, everyone in this room, from 1 to 100 on whether or not you're going to support Barack Obama. That's pretty easy. 1 to 100 on whether or not you're going to vote. That's how we got higher turnout with youth and minorities. And for the first time, 1 to 100 on whether or not you were a persuadable voter. Do you know how many people were actually ever open to both campaigns? 8%. 8% of people were open to both campaigns.
Nationally or in those 10 states?
In those 10 states. And which is I think, startlingly dangerous number for the long-term democracy and our debate about issues. But knowing that allowed us to micro-target every single thing we did directly to voters. You know, the number one most purchased ad by the Romney campaign in Florida the last week of the election was reruns of Leave It to Beaver. It's true. The number one purchase ad by the Obama campaign was a show called The Bee in Apartment 23, which is no longer even a show, but it was the number one watched show by Latina women from 18 to 25. And that's because we knew exactly who we wanted, and we went out and got them.
What was the biggest technical, mechanical mistake the Romney campaign made?
Every one of them? No. I think they believe their own.
What could they have done with the hand they were dealt? How could they have played it better from the mechanical point of view?
Well, on the mechanics, I think I would give the Romney campaign some credit here. They raised more maximum contributions than any campaign in history. They did a really great job fundraising, and I think he had a theory about his message and stuck to it. But on the mechanics of data, you know, it was never real. It was always just a show for you guys. And, you know, we every night for 18 months modeled the election 66,000 times a night. And we knew by...
And say what you mean by that.
So we built very sophisticated models of our chances of winning battleground states. And we ran 66,000 models. And the reason why it's 66,000 is that's the number that you don't have any increase in variability over that. So it didn't really matter. And so every night I would get a printout on my desk that said, today you have a 47% chance to win Florida. We spent our money that way. We moved our surrogates around that way. We put the president's travel in those ways, all because we had better data. And we spent our time in the right places. And the Romney campaign was still doing it the way that you did it in the 1980s. And they've got to evolve.
One more data question for you. What's the next frontier? What do you wish you'd been able to do that you weren't able to do? What will the winning campaign do in 2016 with data that you weren't quite able to do?
Look, in 2012, we were able to, if you were an undecided voter in a battleground state at the very end, you got from the Obama campaign your own website, Barack Obama /Mike Allen. It had all of your issues. It had a map from your house to the voting location. It had what your friends had done, because one of the most prevalent reasons you vote is whether your friends are doing it. That was the beginning of a real personalized campaign. What I think in 2016, and you see Dish and DirecTV just rolled out this really interesting new ad purchasing scheme that will allow you for the first time to show Mike Allen messages that no one else sees and give you an experience.
Show my household.
Yep, show your household. And I can go directly to you and have a conversation about gay rights or about whatever issue you care about.
And then explain the mechanics of that.
That you will be able to purchase whatever data you want, whatever shows you want, whatever internet stuff you want, whatever mobile you want, and you'll get a campaign that looks nothing like the campaign Amy will get. And that will truly have a discussion with you about the issues in a very healthy and good way, and will allow us to spend much more targeted time and money and really go after those 8% of people.
Steve Schmidt, Edelman uses data and targeting in very sophisticated ways. The Republican Party, though, is in a data hole that's almost as bad as its demographic hole.
It's a huge problem. And, you know, part of it is driven culturally. When we talk about the demographic hole, very difficult to recruit the number of PhD engineers out of Silicon Valley who can make these things work if you are the party that is talking about contraception, or the party that is viewed as hostile to minorities, particularly Asians, and very difficult if you're viewed as the party that will not grant full equality to that younger generation's gay friends, brothers and sisters and colleagues. And so we are in a deep hole on this. And one of the things, you know, which is very technical, but you know, was talked about a great deal after the campaign, is really the tens of millions of dollars of wasted targeting by the Romney campaign with its advertising dollars, tens of millions of dollars. And so we have a fundamental technology problem inside the Republican Party. Now, when you lose a presidential election, and we in 2004 had taken a big step forward, and we were outgunning the Democrats technically. What drives innovation from a technical perspective in a campaign is losing elections, because you have to innovate, to come back and to get out ahead. But really, the problem is when you look at the composition of the campaigns from a staff perspective, these campaigns, the types of people that worked on them, were very, very similar. It's not the case anymore. The sheer volume of the number of computer engineers and software engineers and coders that are part of the Democratic campaign firmament just doesn't exist on the Republican side, and we have to fix that.
Jim Messina, one of the most fascinating parts of the story behind the amazing campaign that you all built is a couple years out, before the campaign, you knew that you were going to be the manager, and you went out and you saw Eric Schmidt, now the executive chairman of Google. Tell us where you saw him and the most important piece of advice that he gave you.
So I did this grand tour after I left the White House, and I went to all over the world, but mostly in Silicon Valley, and spent a bunch of time with CEOs. I spent time with Steve Jobs before he passed. I spent time with a whole bunch of people, but Eric became the most important person for us. He flew to Chicago about every 10 days for 2 years and kind of helped coach me on how to run, because a modern day presidential campaign is not a campaign, it's a corporation. We raised and spent $1.1 billion in 16 months. We had 5,000 paid staff, 1.1 million volunteers, 4 million donors. So Eric really helped us figure out how to build this company and made us think about it that way. But the single most important thing he said to me on the first day was, do not hire any person, and he really meant any person, on your technology or data teams that had ever worked in American politics before. Because you didn't want to build the past, you wanted to build the future. And there was real hiccups and starts there. I remember taking our data team, we had 86 PhD level or on the PhD track mathematicians and engineers, and we took them to experiment in the Wisconsin recall elections. And they were building this, they spent 6 months building this thing. And afterwards I bought all the kids a beer at a bar, and one of them came up to me and said, Jim, I met my first real live voter today. And I was like, and how'd it go? And he's like, oh, our product is not working at all, we're screwed. And I was like, oh fuck. But the truth is, as we saw in healthcare.gov, et cetera, you iterate and you figure out how to build it better. And in the end, I think Steve's exactly right. We had people who left, one of the 3 founders of Facebook, Craig Hughes, left his job for 2 years of his life and moved to Chicago to work for Barack Obama. Those guys are not doing that for the Republicans right now because of the social issues. And we had all those people really innovating and building amazing products that today we have 8 companies that have spun out of the Obama 2012 campaign that are currently out there with big market caps, doing really great work, getting big investments. A very famous Silicon Valley guy walked into one of our data guys the day after the election and handed him a personal check for $1 million and said, I would like to buy you. And the kid took the check and said, excellent, where would you like me to live?
Sold.
Sold.
Yeah. And what was the advice Eric Schmidt gave you about office architecture?
He spent a bunch of time designing our office for us. The answer was no offices and no departments. They had to be in teams of products, which is unlike any other presidential campaign. So we had launch teams across departments, and it looked like you were in there, 800 people all in one room. It was incredibly smelly and very good, but we had real collaboration, and we were able to build some things that were pretty much unprecedented because we gave people 2 magic rules. We'll let you do what you want, and Messina won't screw with you the first year. And the second year we had to be tougher about winning an election, but they really did develop products that today are being sold commercially.
Mayor Villaraigosa, you stayed in the city that you led. You live about 20 minutes, 30 minutes from here, depending on traffic. What's it like to now...
With an accent, depending on traffic, right?
What's it like to now be living under somebody else's leadership in a city you know so intimately?
Look, I loved... I was Speaker of the California State Assembly, as you know, and I loved that. I don't share the same view about the legislature because of those 3 individuals. I love that institution. the public service over the 20 years is something I'm very, very proud of. And being mayor I put everything in it, but I'm not looking back. So, I sit down with the mayor almost every other week, at least when I'm in town, and support him and what he's trying to do, because I love this town. I believe in LA. I've said many times that I think LA is to the world what New York was in the 20th century and London in the 19th. LA doesn't care who your father is. LA just says, do it. And they gave me an opportunity, and so anytime I can support the mayor, I do that. I don't second guess him. I think he likes that. I stay quiet on issues, but I think the future. I know he spoke here yesterday. I think the future of the city is a great one. We got to fix our schools without question. I think that's the challenge that we face in America. I do want to say something, because there was a lot of talk about mechanics, and I was listening. Of course, I was a part of that. I actually thought the Republicans spread their money like peanut butter across the 10 battleground states. I thought they could have been more strategic in some of the states. I mean, they kept on saying they would put out these polls that we didn't know where they came from, and they would say they were ahead here and there, and they'd be spending money.
You remember when they were ahead in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, and we're thinking like, what are you spending money there for? You should be spending money in a state where you're actually in contention. But there's been a focus on mechanics, and I'd like to have us think about and talk about, because you and I engaged a bit this morning about why it's broken. I mean, the mechanics is great, and we won. But the fact of the matter is the country's evenly divided. As far right as the Republicans are on so many issues, the country's fairly evenly divided. Why is that? And I think it is because both parties, as I said earlier, are unwilling to challenge their constituents. Here's an example. The debt limit. I mean, there's a deal there. There's a middle ground deal there. I'm on the Fix the Debt Coalition with a lot of CEOs across the country. Bloomberg's on it as well. There's a middle ground to fix, the tax loopholes that we have, to lower our capital gains tax. Well, raise the capital gains tax, lower our manufacturers tax in the country. There's a smart way to fix Social Security. You had 100 progressives. I love these guys, right? 100 progressives tell Obama that he couldn't even do a CPI change on Social Security. You could fix Medicare without turning it into voucher care, and you could fix Social Security without privatizing it. But nobody wants to do that on either side. And I think that's what's broken with both parties. And so, we may win the election, and I hope we do, as long as the Republicans are as far right as they are. But if we want to restore confidence in government again, because elections should be about that. If we want to restore confidence, we're going to have to reach across the aisle and work with one another. We're going to have to get things done again. And you don't see either party willing to do that right now.
In 30 seconds, just a second. In 30 seconds, I'm going to bring you into the conversation for your free to ask questions. There's a microphone while you're getting set. Amy.
And to build on the mayor's point, that the mechanics of the Obama campaign obviously worked out brilliantly, and Obama was reelected with 51% of the vote, but we didn't see that translate to healthcare.gov, for example. We didn't see it translate to the rest of the Democratic Party that has actually lost seats under President Obama, that issues matter. And I was just debating this with Chris Kofinas, and we were discussing how actually the far left is boxing in centrist Democrats now in campaigns for 2014, and they may very well lose. They're going to have to run to the right in order to appeal to their constituents. But again, issues matter, not just the on-the-ground campaign.
Do we have a question? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
What can we do to give third political parties a fighting chance?
Steve Schmidt.
Well, I think certainly at a presidential level, you can have somebody who runs, and it could be determinative of the outcome of the election. Ross Perot in 92, arguably Ralph Nader in 2000. But I think if you were to have a candidate who was to run as an independent and have an actual chance of winning the presidency, they'll come out of California. And the open primary system in California, and really the falling apart of the Republican Party is that I think that the degree to which you would have someone who is right of center run in California, they'd be fools to try to run under the Republican banner and to spend the resources that they wind up spending to navigate, with the de facto Republican primary process. So I think if you had an independent elected governor of California, and that person was an effective and competent governor, and they wish to run for president, I think that they would have a platform and that they would have a base to be able to, go ahead and do that. There's all sorts of ballot access issues and technical matters that make this much harder than it actually seems. But I think you will see somebody, who's a governor and come up that way. You won't see somebody who's totally outside of politics.
And Steve,
like
is there
Ross
someone in the
Perot.
wings that meets that description?
No, but there ultimately will be. I mean, it's look, our political system, it runs on competition, and so in a state like California, where you have one of the parties has really fallen away, there will, nature abhors a vacuum, right? So that will be filled, by independent candidates who are socially tolerant but fiscally conservative and reform-minded.
Right,
And at the congressional level, Bernie Sanders of Vermont is an independent. And if we remember, Joe Lieberman actually finally ran as an independent. He's no longer in the Senate, but you can see it there.
Okay, so this is a jump ball question. Anybody's free to buzz in, and then Richard will come to you. David Leonhardt, in his new feature in the New York Times, The Upshot, they say there's a 51% chance of Republicans taking control of the Senate. Nate Silver says there's about a 60% chance of Republicans taking control of the Senate in the midterms. Who is more correct?
Nate Silver. I think there's a high likelihood that the Republicans are going to take over the Senate. I'm not the expert here, but I just don't see how we do it given the climate. Now, things could change, obviously, but if you say when I read that 51, it didn't make sense to me.
Seemed too low to you. All right, Richard Socarides.
Thank you. I would be interested to hear how each of the panelists would handicap a Jeb versus Hillary race.
Do we have to have that race? New candidates, please.
Look, I think that race would be a very enthusiastic race for young voters. They would look at that and say, to your point, like we've been seeing this for a very long time. I don't think Jeb Bush can win the modern Republican primary, so I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think there's very little chance of him getting out of that primary. He's taken some very, I think, good stands on issues that would kill him given who controls that process today. And remember, again, Steve talked about it. Democrats have 248 electoral votes for showing up, 242 that we won 6 elections in a row, and not even the Republicans believe New Mexico's on the map anymore. Republicans have 191, so they need 79 and we need 24, and that is a much different math, and they've got to find a general election candidate who can do 3 things. Get the women gender gap under 5 points, Obama won by 10. Get the Latino number under 67, Obama won 71, and figure out how to stop the bleeding with the youth. And if you look at the potential candidates in the Republican primary who are playing that game and who just went to the Sheldon Adelson primary a couple weeks ago in Vegas, none of those people are talking about issues that can, to Amy's point, it really is about issues at some point in a general election. And none of those people are talking about issues that could move those numbers.
Yeah, I don't see, I like Jeb Bush. I have a lot of respect for him. We've worked together on education reform issues. I don't know how I don't know how anybody gets out of that primary. It's just, again, I criticize both parties, but I do think it's more broken on that side. And I think you just can't get out of a Republican.
Who is somebody who could get out of that primary?
Rand Paul.
Well, I disagree. I think that Jeb Bush could get out of the primary.
Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Florida.
No, but absent Jeb, who else could get out of it?
Look, I think it's as wide open today as it has ever been. I think there are scenarios where Rand Paul could be the Republican nominee, and I think that there are. I think that it certainly won't be one of the Republican senators, with the exception of Paul. And other than that, I think you need a governor. I think it's the most reviled part of the most reviled institution in the country is the Republican conference. And I think Marco Rubio, I think on the immigration issues, that he's 42. I just don't think he's going to run the gauntlet on the Republican side. But it's wide open. And I just look at the field, you name all the names, it's going to be someone. But how we get to 270, how you beat Hillary Clinton structurally, and Amy's exactly right about this. I mean, you have to have a platform, a message, a vision for moving the country forward. And I don't think that any of them are talking about any issue holistically that accomplishes this.
Jim Messina, why did you applaud the idea of running against Senator Rand Paul?
Because we would kick his ass.
But talk us through why.
I believe that, and I think that would be, your Goldwater moment. I think he would win a historically few amount of electoral votes. I think you would see some third-party movement to try to get another candidate. I think he would be a historically bad candidate for the Republican Party in a pretty healthy way, right? Because you guys have got to come back to the center. Bill Clinton brought us back to the center 15 years ago. Someone's going to do that for you. But my Republican friends keep saying, our problem is we don't nominate a true conservative. Romney wasn't a conservative, McCain wasn't conservative, and in the primary today, they believe that. And they're going to nominate a true conservative and put him up on the ticket. And if it's Rand Paul, that would be awesome.
So who would you fear? Who would they be smart to nominate?
Look, I think Governor Christie, before his recent travails, would have been a very good general election candidate for them. I am intrigued by Scott Walker. I think Walker, is the one person so far who could unite the two bases of the Republican Party, the Koch brothers and the Christian right. And I think that could be acceptable to both. And he's won in a tough, leaning blue state. So he'd be an interesting candidate.
Amy Holmes, is it reasonable to say that today, at this moment, the favorite would be Rand Paul?
It looks like it. I mean, he's doing the most work, and he's has the support in Iowa, New Hampshire. He was the favorite at CPAC. He's the big star of the moment. But whether or not you think he would be a strong presidential candidate, I think he has done some very good things for the GOP in terms of injecting issues. One that's been very popular with younger voters has to do with the NSA and wiretapping and government overreach. And that caught a lot of the GOP by surprise, actually. And if you remember, Senator Paul, he went out to Berkeley to a very warm reception by a lot of those left-wing students who were also very fearful of this government intrusion into our private lives. So, you had asked us before, last night, to talk about mega trends and what you're seeing in politics. And one of the trends that I'm seeing is, as this conference demonstrates, an injection of libertarianism into conservatism, into the GOP, that does have a lot of youth support. Now, whether that can translate to youth votes, organizing and motivating those voters toward the GOP and voting for the GOP, that's another question. But Rand Paul certainly has raised that flag.
I think there was a question. Yes, sir.
When I was growing up in New York, there was a movement, the Rockefeller Republicans. And it seems to me that that's the target that everyone's looking for, something who is more socially liberal and fiscally conservative, at least as a middle ground. Does that exist? Is there any chance of anybody ever coming out in that way and having a shot at getting elected?
I think if they lose enough elections, that's where they're going to go. Because at the end of the day, if they continue in this direction, they're going to be the Whig Party of the next millennia. And some other party will come up. I just don't see how they continue along the track when you look at what both Steve and Jim said, what the calculus is today, what Democrats start with. So I think they'll move as they continue to lose elections. You've seen it in California, where you have very conservative Republican Congress members now for immigration reform. We started this whole immigration thing with Proposition 187, if you remember, here in California. So I think over time, as they lose more elections, you'll see more of them going to the center. And I'm hoping you'll see that with us as well. You mentioned Hillary and Jeb and the like. I've said, and I'm a big Hillary person, as everybody knows, she's going to have to be a candidate for change. She's going to have to move our party more to the center, I believe, on a lot of issues, particularly education and education reform. I've done I'll be doing 2 panels on education. This is the most important issue facing the nation, and Democrats are unwilling to challenge, our base constituency, primarily the teachers union, with respect to a whole panoply of issues, the issues of choice, giving parents and students options, charter schools, the issue of student growth over time, and of actually evaluating teachers and addressing the issue of seniority and tenure. So I think our party, we're going to have to fix, our pension system. It's broken. We're going to have to fix the debt and the debt limit. And to the extent that we're willing to do it in a way that I think the vast majority of people will agree is down the middle, I think we'll be a more successful party. I do.
Okay, we're about to get the hook here, so we're going to do a quick rapid round. Today, the lead story of the Washington Post was President Obama with the lowest approval rating he's ever had in the Washington Post ABC News panel. Amy Holmes, I saw the segment that you anchor on The Blaze is called Hot List, and you did a segment mashing together all the press love for the Obama, called President Obama Can Do Everything. It was all the things that President Obama can do. What happened?
What happened? Well, I think there was a lot of hype over what President Obama could do that seemed to be generated from those closest to him. I was quoting Valerie Jarrett, for example, what she told the New Yorker about how he was just too smart to do the types of things, the ordinary things. I think one of the big problems is his inability to reach out to the other side, to work with the other side. If you look at, healthcare, Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act, passed entirely with Democratic votes, not reaching out to the other side for Republican ideas. If you look at the beginning of his second term, focusing on gun control, another issue that puts red state Democrats like Mark Pryor in a very difficult position. One of Mark Pryor's first ads was that he wasn't going to listen to Washington when it came to gun control. I think, unfortunately, President Obama did not learn the lessons of 2010, which was to move to the center, to work with the other side, and that, in fact, has endangered his own party.
Mayor Villaraigosa, flashes forward to January 2019. This president's out of office. How will he be seen?
I hope he'll be seen positively. I actually give him higher grades for trying.
What's his sentence? What's his headline?
Well, it remains to be seen because, as we mentioned, there'll be midterm elections. But I think probably the headline will be didn't quite do it.
Jim Messina,
I'm just being as honest as I can be.
Jim Messina, will Hillary Clinton be able to?
But I'm not putting all the blame on him for not doing it. The level of partisanship, I think I have to say this. The level of partisanship that we haven't seen this since maybe the 1930s, but a lot of people think since the Civil War. I mean, where they don't work with him on anything. And I will say this on healthcare. On healthcare,
Senator Landrieu, she's running an ad right now saying she opposes the Obama administration on energy policy.
Right, but I think they did reach out on healthcare.
Okay, we'll accept your asterisk. Jim Messina, will Hillary Clinton be able to generate the excitement that Barack Obama did?
It'll be different demographic. It'll be different electorate. But I think she absolutely will. I think having the first female president is a very motivating thing. I think having someone of her stature and her ability, I think she will have an unprecedented amount of support, both volunteers and money to build her presidential campaign if she decides to run.
Steve Schmidt, you have the last word. What would a President Clinton be like? Another President Clinton?
Well, I think first off, it's a very tough job. And it's not unique for a president in his 6th year to, have fallen where he does on the approval perspective. But I think, Hillary Clinton is experienced. She's smart. She's tough. And I think that one of the things that, is true about Hillary Clinton is she had very strong relationships with Republican members in the Senate. And I do think that sooner or later, we're going to have a president and an opposition leadership able to do the business of the country together. And, certainly it hasn't happened over the last 8 years, and maybe Hillary Clinton would be able to do that.
It sounds like you would not be surprised by a President Clinton.
No.
And I trust you to do this in 15 seconds. You are consulting to the Conservative Party in the UK. How, why?
Because I think David Cameron's the right choice in that election. He's been a great ally for the United States and is a great leader, and will win re-election next year.
I want to thank the Milken Institute for bringing us together. Thank Mike Milton for founding this. Thank you for being here. And thank our panelists for a great conversation. Thank you very much.